Derek, and Ken. Say hi, guys.
Hi,
Hello.
guys.
Hi, guys.
Okay, so we talked about Golden Age, Silver Age, Bronze Age. Now we're coming to the Modern Age.
So,
Sorry?
I was going to say, Derek and I, before we recorded, both admitted our sort of, it's the odd thing about the modern age is it's sort of like everything after the Bronze Age. So we're talking 40, 50 years
Yeah,
of
that's a
comic
long,
books.
long time.
hmm
I mean, is
Yes.
it really that? Or is there, like, I have a theory that it's probably more split up, but just hasn't been in the history books as
I
more
don't think
split.
yeah, I agree. I don't think because some of the stuff that came out in the 80s is kind of different than what came out in the 90s and what came out in the 2000s. So I think the decades kind of speaks for themselves.
Yeah, maybe.
Think it's
It's
more of a
because,
by
like,
the decade thing.
yeah, maybe. Like,
Because
so,
if you look at it, like especially the 80s, I mean, I'm a huge fan of the 80s because, and one of the biggest things I will say about the 80s is, this is where Archie Goodwin started it, Epic
Oh, I
Comics,
love Epic. Yeah,
and
Epic's.
Epic Comics is like one of the things that took a comic book fan into amazing artwork, adult stories, and stuff like that. And now that's one of the key things at the start of the early modern age that held out to high respect for me.
I
Well,
think
Epic
Epic,
magazines were fun. Yeah, the
Yeah.
magazine was great.
Oh
yeah.
yeah, everything with
You
anything with the Epic logo on it at that time was amazing.
I
like
think
growing up
Epic
as an
also,
artist. Like just sorry, Chris. Just to say, like you had John J. Muth and Kent Williams who were both
That's what I was going
introduced
to bring up.
in
Yeah.
Epic, and I because I went to art school. That's exactly the guys I was like inspired by going into art school.
I think inspired is a great way to say it because I think the other thing Epic did is it sort of created the independent movement that TikTok Tom probably rode the
Oh,
wave
it
on.
did.
And it was the
And
idea that you didn't have to go to DC and Marvel to make something, and you could make
yeah,
something outside of that boundary. And I think that's a
Right.
good thing in the 80s that was sort of like, cemented them was that I think Epic is a representation of the independent boom that happened in the 80s that was
Epic was
massive.
Epic was one of those imprints that said, you know what, you could do comics, do it your way, whatever way you want. Don't worry about house style.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But don't you think Epic also, to some degree, took their cues from British 2000 AD comics to some
Oh, I
degree?
agree. 2000
I
AD,
felt that.
heavy metal, all that stuff.
Right. Heavy metal, that's a good one too.
Oh yeah, no, it took influences from that. Now, one good thing about Epic was, I hate to say it, and this is a good part of it, is it had creators that, North American creators on it. So it was like North America's version of heavy metal, or like you said, 2000 AD. And that's when I first got introduced to, like you said, John J. Moof and Kent Williams. And,
Yeah.
even someone like Jim Starlin, I mean, he did. I remember reading Jim Starlin stuff in Captain Marvel and other stuff, but when he
Yeah.
started doing Dreadstar and all that stuff, it was
Oh,
amazing.
Dreadstar, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I mean when you look at the 80s, I think it's probably a bit of I think Marvel and DC might have been sort of pushing people a little too much. And there was this and with the introduction of comic book shops, as we talked about in the Bronze Age, comic book shops sort of had a boom. There was suddenly a place for people to do their own thing. And that's I think why smaller groups like Epic and even to a point where you're looking at TikTok Tom and zines and stuff like that really sort of being the norm. I think
yeah,
also printing became easier. You could actually get a decently printed thing at a local copy shop instead of having to like go to a print shop. And so there was
and
a
that
little bit more, there was a little bit more flexibility with what you could do. And so I think the beginning of the modern era might be the beginning of like indie comics at the same time.
yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah, I could see that.
So in our previous episode, we mentioned Crisis on Infinite Earths starting off, and I think that was one of the starts of the modern age where they decided, okay, we're gonna reboot everything, reboot Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman for DC side. Marvel, I don't think did really that until later in the 80s, late 80s when they start doing the new universe stuff. So,
Yeah,
I
Yeah,
mean,
that,
Well,
that
that didn't. New Universe, I don't think was a re. It was. I think it was meant to be a reboot, but none of the Marvel higher ups were willing to bite, so it became its own separate thing, which actually might have kind of doomed it a little bit, not
Yes.
being allowed to take that leap.
It's
Um,
Well, it
it's
goes
it's
back to my earlier point, though, Derek, about how they started it. You had a creator on it, and then next thing you know, 5 issues later was new writer, new
Yeah,
artist, and it
that's
made it
it.
extremely frustrating, at least for
yeah.
me, because I read all those books.
I think Marvel sort of actually, I think while DC was pushing their stories together, I think Marvel was kind of fragmenting a bit during the beginning of the modern era. In that X-Men seemed to be its own thing. Like there
Mm.
would Iron Man would rarely appear in X-Men or anything like
yeah,
that. And the stories sort of went off on their own sort of thing, whereas DC was looking at like how can we integrate our universe into together. It seemed like Marvel was sort of fragmenting a little bit at the beginning of the modern era.
that that
It
that
was.
makes
It was.
sense. That makes sense. That I think if I remember that Bronze Age era, that like at Marvel, that was primarily the Jim Shooter era.
Yeah.
And then after Secret Wars, like Secret Wars was like the
Big thing. Yes.
big thing at Marvel, and then it kind of it kind of petered out a little bit shortly after. I remember I want to say 86 was about the end of the Jim Shooter era, if I had to.
I think it was, yeah, mid to late 80s.
I
Jim
think
Shooter
maybe
left
a bit
Marvel.
later, but it could be. You could be right. Yeah, I don't know offhand.
But
Now,
that's but that's the
what you just mentioned is another, and you guys are going to hate me for saying this, is the downfall of comics in a certain way was Secret Wars and Crisis, the crossovers, you know, where, it kind of
Well,
frustrated readers.
but Chetan, there was no crossovers for Secret Wars One. They only did it with Secret Wars Two.
yeah.
Secret Wars
Yes,
One
you're
was
right.
just
You're right.
contained, right? But
But,
then when
but
they did the sequel, that's when they started like he Beyonder was meeting everyone, and
yes, everyone.
every book
Now,
crossed
to
over.
defend that, I have the Crisis crossovers. I have a
Yeah.
hardcover of those, and I reread some of those. And at that time, DC did do a good job of, you know, interconnecting all the storylines. They made
Yeah.
sense. Where it made sense. I mean, they were doing a big project. It made sense. Later on, the crossovers were, I hate to say it, were too much,
Yeah.
Well,
and
there's this
that's going
idea of
down.
creating a continuity of a single universe instead of just having stories. Like that was the thing.
Yeah.
And it got to the point where it wasn't like occasionally characters would meet up. It would be like every issue there has got to be some,
Yeah, it
Yeah.
got annoying. That's so annoying after a
it is.
while.
You want your
Well,
friendly
now,
neighborhood Spider-Man to be a neighborhood Spider-Man just in his neighborhood, in his part of the world.
and
He doesn't need to go to space.
You know what's funny?
mentioning
You know what's funny though? I loved in Avengers because I read every issue of Avengers. I'm a huge fan. I loved it when they would tease a Spider-Man would show up. He's gonna join the Avengers. And he comes in for the one issue, and then at the end, it's not gonna happen. But they used to
they
tease
would have it
that
on the
every
cover. Remember the cover with the
yes,
squares on it and say "new member," and they always
new
point out
member. And
Spider-Man
yeah,
would be the
I used
center
to love
focus.
that. I
Yeah,
love that growing up as a reader.
yeah.
Yeah. And
And
he would
mentioning
always, it was the
that,
Fantastic Four too. It was always the, you know,
Right?
yes,
it
yes,
was, it was basically Spider-Man was so popular that it was like they tried to drag him into everything.
everything. Yeah,
I think the 80s was what if started, was it in the
Yeah, what
70s or
if
the
is
80s?
great.
Right
yes.
there.
What
Yeah,
if?
there
Yeah, you're
was.
right.
Oh,
Because
that was.
the first issue had Spider-Man.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And I actually, one of my recent sort of fallbacks is I read sort of the early what ifs, a whole bunch of them. And
good
I
run.
think that was a
Good
bit of
run.
an answer from like the artists and writers being frustrated with what was going on in the industry and then going
Yeah.
like what if they actually just joined? Like I don't want to tease Spider-Man and Fantastic Four. It's like what if Spider-Man was in Fantastic Four? And they sort of were able to play around. So I almost feel like what if was both the artists and writers as well as maybe some readers sort of like frustration with what was going on in the
You could
Marvel
do a whole
universe.
plot on what if because there's so many great stories. Like
Oh yeah.
Oh,
what if Conan came to the modern times? One of my
Oh,
favorite.
that was an amazing story.
I
Yeah,
love that issue. Yeah, like there's
yeah.
so many good stories you could cover on that.
Yeah.
one thing I
Now,
remember and really enjoyed with the what ifs too was you were talking about all these big mega crossovers. But what if was able to like kind of boil those down to maybe a couple of pages. You kind of got the
yeah.
gist of everything, and then still was able to dedicate 17, 18 pages to the
Yeah.
story, so it wasn't such an overwhelming thing. Like you had enough of a recap of the how the events, whatever event they were talking about, played out, and then they were able to do their story. And like I think maybe the longest run for me that I remember was maybe you'd get the odd two-parter, but most of them were
Most of them were one-shot issues, and
yeah,
that was
one shot. Yeah.
I think some were even less than one shots. I think some were like
yeah,
split issues where you'd have
yeah,
like
split
two stories
issues.
in an issue.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, they would do that.
Now, one thing started the modern age was we saw Spider-Man's black costume.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I think that was one of the biggest things for the 80s,
Yeah.
Spider-Man's black costume.
Mhm.
Spider-Man, then Venom. It led to Venom afterwards. But
Technically Venom, yes.
yeah.
So let's move along and say now modern age 80s, we got all the revamps and stuff. Now let's go to the 90s for the modern age.
Mm.
90s was a
It was a time.
it was a
Yeah.
time
It was
where
a time, is
it was
right.
a time where you want to say amazing stuff came out and
Mm.
terrible stuff came out. Oh,
Marvel had terrible stuff.
no, one more thing about the modern age before we forget. 80s had the big boom of black and white comics.
Well, that was like the indie thing, right?
Yeah, but they saturated the market so much. I mean, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles came out and it was huge, and every single person wanted to do their copy. Was it the hamsters and all that stuff?
Radioactive adolescent black belt hamsters.
There you
Yes.
go. And every creator, every company did their version of a black and white.
Yeah.
That
I
makes
think that
sense.
was great too. I think that was because I think printing costs for black and whites were reasonable, and so the average person could actually afford
Yeah,
to get in the market and make a new thing. And I think that actually
yeah.
leads us to the '90s really well because I think what happened was some of those comic books actually sold and did well and started making money, and then suddenly it was like people like Todd McFarlane were like, I'm one of the most popular comic book artists. How come Larson, how come these Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle guys are making so much money and I'm under a contract with Marvel? Why don't I try that too? And I think,
And that's the biggest thing of the modern age was late 80s was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle. And how much you know that thing exploded,
I'm
Oh
willing to
yeah,
say that if without Turtles, you don't have Image.
that's a fair
Oh,
assessment. Um, that is a fair assessment, and I grew up in that's when I start getting into comics is in that Image era. It was like again something I could get into like starting out, not be intimidated by, say, at that point, 30 years of Spider-Man continuity or
yes.
all the various eras of DC, all those eras. And like, I'm not going to argue if the books were good or not. That's a bit of a mixed bag for me. But
But that starts off. So what Chris said and you said. So McFarlane came on to Spider-Man, and that blew everyone away. And
Yeah.
then he went on to Image, and that just exploded.
Yeah.
To I don't know if you want to call it good or bad. I think there's
Well, I
little
think
bit
it's
of
good.
Yeah,
Can't
I
be
think it's
little
good
bit
bad.
of
too.
both. Yeah.
I think
So,
more people making stories is good. And that's,
oh
I mean,
no, no,
whether
I
they're good
agree.
or
I
not,
agree.
doesn't matter.
Yeah.
The more people making stories, the better.
Yes.
Well, look at it now, like Image, like right. If we talk about Image for a sec, look at it right now. Like Jeff Johns leaves DC, he goes to Image, and he
Oh
starts
yeah.
his
No, it's great.
company
No,
there. I
I
think
no,
it's
I agree. I
fantastic,
mean,
and I'm
I
reading all
mean,
those books. They're all great. They're all
no,
And
really
but the only reason I say in a bad way was,
okay.
comic shops went crazy over that stuff, and I hate to say it, when you have let's say Spawn #1 on the shelf, and X Force and all that stuff, Chris's comic gets pushed aside, or we don't even order it,
to a
because they
degree,
want
I
the
think
shelves.
comic book shops got a little. I think, if anything, though, I think Marvel and DC started getting pushed off the shelves a little bit, and the idea of an up and
Yeah,
comer
everyone
became
got
possible.
yeah,
and
and
that image formation led to events like Superman getting killed off and led to
yes.
Mhm.
Batman getting his back broken and st like things like that are really that's where you kind of start seeing Marvel in particular starting to do gimmicks, not even like special
Oh, gimmicks,
50th or
yes.
25th
Gimmicks.
issue. There's one Ghost Rider that was like an issue 13, but it was a glow in the, it was a cool cover, mind you, but like 13 for me kind of seemed like a random number for a comic to do a gimmick.
Yeah. I think the problem, I mean, I think there's a good thing in the 90s and a bad thing in the 90s. The good thing was is people were making books. Like there was independent people. And I mean, even if you consider McFarlane and Liefeld and those guys to be independent because they went on their own, it's great that they could do their own thing. But on the other hand, the problem was you then got the speculator market, which was I think they're separate
Yeah,
things.
that
And
was,
they sort of happened at the same time, but they're separate things. And
but
so
the
Yes.
where suddenly
speculator,
your
but the
chromium
speculator
covers
market, when it burst, it killed off a lot of things.
Oh
and kill
yeah.
a lot of things that should have been killed off too.
No, but it closed down a lot of comic shops and stuff like that also. So
Yeah,
speculator boom. When I was working at the comic shop downtown, Dragon Lady, I remember a speculator market. People would come in and people you'd never seen in the shop buying like 10 copies of one issue.
yep,
It's like, and you knew that person had no interest in even looking in the book.
yep,
No.
And mind you, as a working at the store, the owner loved it because he's sales are high. But the thing is, the one thing about the comic shop is you want the regular customers coming in and new customers coming in that are buying your books. This Joe Smith or whatever coming in, he or she's not going to come in after the boom's gone.
yeah,
And
yeah.
that's what happened because stores were ordering like, hundreds of copies of books, were expecting people to buy, multiple copies. And like Derek said, the gimmick covers. I mean, come on. I mean, the gimmick covers went overboard.
I think the
The
problem I
Marvels
always
did
had
not,
when I
for
was
sure.
when I was collecting during that period was the fact that if I happened to miss my comic books that week, I'd then have to buy them off the wall for 10 times the
Oh,
price.
That was another thing.
that
Yes.
sucks.
That
That
was
sucks.
That
another
is
thing. Yes.
unpleasant.
You know.
Yes.
And I think, you were saying that a lot of comic book shops went under. And just to sort of play the devil's advocate, kind of good. Because if they were doing slimy things like hoarding comics, not putting them out on the shelves when they were popular, then putting them up on the wall for 10 times the price, I'm glad they're out of business. Because that's
But I
that's a
wonder
crappy thing to do.
I wonder if a lot of good shops went under also.
Sure, I think some did. I think that's unfortunate, but I think that there were some really nasty practices going
Oh,
on, and
oh
I
yeah.
saw
Oh
them
yeah.
myself.
Oh
Like
yeah.
so, it's like it's kind of like it was a time when comic book shop owners, and I'm not saying all of them, there's some good ones for sure, but a lot of comic book shop owners got really greedy, and
Oh,
a
they
lot
did.
of people got greedy as well.
And
And so,
mentioning greed, one of the worst things for comic was the distribution thing.
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
Greed.
Yeah.
Something
Yeah.
like greed. And that killed off a lot of independent publishers.
Oh, I
Because,
remember the mid 90s in particular, there was stuff like Bone and Strangers in Paradise starting to move under banners like Image just to survive the distribution wars.
well, Ken knows this. I mean, we had issue 4 ready of TikTok Tom, and as soon as the market crashed,
There was no issue.
we were lucky that we kind of didn't send it to the publisher. I mean, printer.
Yes.
Because if we
Yes,
sent it to the
exactly.
printer, we would have been
We would have
stuck
been
with
screwed.
those copies. Because at that time, when the distribution thing happened, most independents, we had no distributor at that time.
yeah,
Because Diamond, the ones that supported independent comics, all of them went under.
yeah,
Right.
Yeah,
So I mean
unfortunate.
that's one of the nastiest things about the '90s, which I hated was, the greed of Marvel and DC at that time killed off a lot of good creators.
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
but
I
they
think the
found
90s.
they found ways to put out
Well,
more.
they did, but it was hard to get back up because it was just like, you put all that time and effort into your books and stuff like that. Now, then like, certain distributors were open to, independent publishers. And you had Diamond coming in and Diamond just, if you're an independent, if you're at Marvel, DC, Image or Dark Horse, they didn't care.
Yeah.
True.
Well, they had exclusive contracts too. Like a lot of these companies, like
Yeah.
Marvel and DC, would have exclusive contracts, and basically, if a comic book shop wanted Marvel comics, they had to buy from Diamond, and then Diamond would say things like, "Well, if you start using other distributors for buying other books, we're not going to sell to you." So there was all
Yes.
kinds of weird things like that would happen that was like really super sketchy.
Now, one thing about the modern age 90s, and this is going back to our previous episode where Derek was talking about where Jim Shooter left Marvel 90s, he started up Valiant.
Oh yeah, Valiant.
And that was huge for a long time
Yeah.
until I think he got booted off Valiant.
He got he got booted off of off of Valiant, and I don't recall them lasting too much further past that.
Yeah.
Um, that's again about the time as I'm starting to get into comics. I first read Shooter gets booted from Valiant, starts Defiant,
Defiant, that's it.
Marvel and
Defiant first.
Marvel buried them. Marvel buried them with so much legal over. Oh, it was their flagship book, Warriors of Plasm. I think their Marvel UK had a book that was called Plasmer.
Yeah.
Like the concepts
Yeah.
like weren't close enough together to warrant the lawsuit. And Defiant did win in court, but Marvel just inundated them with so much like just stalling, and like Marvel had the money to kind
I
of
didn't, to be honest, I didn't look at much of the Defiant stuff, but I know Valiant stuff. Jim Shooter had a lot of good creators on those books.
Oh yeah, totally.
I read
Yeah.
Plasma, a couple issues of that. It was pretty bad.
Was it? Okay.
I wasn't a big fan. Like I didn't mind Valiant. I liked Valiant because I think they took some of I like the Valiant stuff that was based on the old characters, like the Gold Key stuff, like that they had. They tended to be pretty good, but then it got kind of stupid as it. I found Valiant couldn't keep it up the story beyond sort of what
Yes.
the Gold Key sort of original stuff, and then it kind of went. And then once I saw Plasma, and I was like, I think I was working at a comic book shop, or maybe at the animation studio by then, but I remember flipping through, and I was just like, this is just unreadable.
Yeah, but EXO and the Nightman, there was some good stuff there. Sludge.
Oh, there was good stuff. Yeah.
I loved all those books.
So now here's another imprint that we need to talk about because all of us are influenced by it. For the 90s, Vertigo.
Yeah, Vertigo was great.
I mean, DC in the late 80s decided they want to change and do more. I mean, this is where I guess you want to blame Alan Moore when he started doing Swamp Thing and they want to branch out into more adult-oriented stories for mature readers. And all of us are influenced by Vertigo and Epic. I mean, those are, I mean, I'm heavily influenced by those two imprints.
Same.
I'm going to play the devil's advocate here, and I'm going to say that Vertigo was just DC trying to cash in on the independent boom.
You think so?
Really? I don't think so.
I think they saw indie comics doing well, and I think that they went, listen, how can we make money off of it?
You have to remember, like something like Swamp Thing and what else was around. A couple of other titles were around before the Vertigo imprint came out.
Yeah, sure. Swamp Thing was the main one.
Yeah. So, yeah, even Animal Man, I think they were around before.
Yes, Animal Man was. Yeah,
all those were around before the Vertigo imprint. They just
technically so was Sandman.
Well,
yeah,
okay,
you're right. Yeah, you're right.
So, Chris, let's just go back to your point because I'm not sure I agree with you. Because at that time, Karen Berger decided to go to. They opened up the company to for submissions, and they went to the UK and found out that it was a really rich environment for like artists and writers, and brought them all over. So I don't know if that was entirely.
I think in a way, yes, Chris is right, or we're trying to cash in on that. But on the other hand, DC didn't directly say, "Hey, let's go to the Hernandez brothers or Peter Bagg and all those guys and get them onto our books." They decided, you know what, let's get these creators from the UK who are doing really good, and and let's get them over here, and let them do, what character do you want to write,
Yeah. I don't think it's a bad thing, but I just think that as a business, it was a decision to sort of be like, how can we, like this indie comic thing, and at that point too, your Tank Girls were getting popular and everything like that. And I
Yeah.
think that they sort of were like looking at indie labels. They said, how can we create our own indie label? And sort of, and it
Yeah.
worked to a degree because
No,
people
no,
didn't
it
look at
worked.
Vertigo as being DC necessarily. They looked at it as a separate thing.
But
And
I
I
think
think
It gave us some good stuff though, like
I think it
amazing
Peter,
was a
stuff. Like I think it
I think
Grant
it
worked.
was
Morrison. Like
I think it was a
two of my
smart move
all-time favorite
because
writers.
oh yeah, no, I think it was a smart move because I mean for me, I top books I bought were Sandman, Hellblazer, and Swamp Thing. I bought them like
Yep,
crazy and
same,
Animal. I bought them like crazy
same.
and had fun.
Yeah. Like I said, I think it was a good thing. Like I think creatively it produced some of the best books that came out in, we would say, call this the modern era. But
Yeah.
I think from a business standpoint, it was a bit of DC going, well, our main superheroes aren't selling. Indie comics are a boom. How do we do that? And it's like, well, we create this other company, call it Vertigo. Let crazy artists do it. Let Sam Keith draw a comic book, which is and, and then we have a separate thing. So we have an indie label that's not really an indie label, but kind of is at the same time.
And you know
And
what was funny about that time was when Vertigo was coming out, that's when you had the speculation market. So you had one end of one spectrum and the other end. And it was just like, and one side was just like, producing gimmick stuff, and the other side was producing creative stuff.
yeah, and I think it actually says a lot about the indie comic scene because I think the indie comic scene was so not into the gimmicks and so into the stories that again DC said, well, we can't do both in our universe. So how do we feed that independent market, which is more interested in art and story than they are in silver, flashy, gold
And
trimmed
mentioning the
hologram
independent
covers?
market, that's when early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, that's when Love and Rockets took off and was huge. And even Dark Horse. Dark
Yeah,
Horse was one of the, technically, if you want to call them independent publishers at that time, they were starting off and they kicked ass in the beginning. I mean,
What
they had
about like
a lot of,
Caliber Press, Chetan as well?
even Caliber, yes,
Caliber,
Caliber,
because I
yes.
submitted like all I had several projects I submitted to Caliber at the time. Like, why not? It was
Oh
things
yeah,
no,
I
Caliber was huge. I mean, they had a lot of talent like Vincent Locke, and
yeah, I
Guy
loved it.
Davis and all those guys.
Yeah, guaranteed.
And that might have put Chris's point to valid. Chris made a valid point about the independent publishers and stuff like that, where some of the guys from Caliber went on to DC Vertigo.
Well, yeah, well,
Almost a
obviously
lot of them.
the
Vincent
money's
Locke
there.
was the main one. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, he was the main one.
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So
So
I
now
think we
let's
should
talk.
probably wrap up modern at the end of the 90s and maybe we should maybe consider the aughts and do that as the super modern or another episode.
The aughts works.
The
Yeah.
aughts.